Notre Dame certainly has a tough road ahead in the college football playoff, but this Irish team is a legitimate contender to win the national championship, and it might be their best chance to end that title drought in decades. Pete Sampson and I break it all down on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports. And thanks for joining me here on Thursday, December 12th, and for making this your first listen each and every day. I would really appreciate it if you took a quick second to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you might be tuning in today. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. One programming note before we get rolling, I'm taking questions for another mailbag episode that will come out tomorrow. So make sure you submit your questions. As always, you can drop them in below in the YouTube comments, or you can hit me up on X at Locked On Irish or in the Instagram DMs at Locked On Irish Pod. But as for today, we have a very special guest. Pete Sampson of The Athletic makes his return to the program to preview Notre Dame's run in the college football playoff. Pete and I are both very high on this Irish team and what they are capable of. But we both recognize that Indiana presents a difficult challenge right off the bat. We also took some time to reflect on how Notre Dame got to this point, because neither of us thought this was going to be possible after the loss to Northern Illinois, and yet here we are. I had a ton of fun catching up with Pete. I hope you enjoyed as well. Check it out. All right, Pete Sampson from The Athletic is back for the first time in a long time. I'm pretty sure the last time you came on was like a week before the Texas A&M game, which feels like an eternity ago. But let's start with what's to come for this Notre Dame team. This is their third appearance in the college football playoff, first in the new format, obviously, but it is the fourth time that they have had a path to play for a national championship dating back to 2012. How would you describe your confidence level in this team going into the playoff compared to 2020, 2018, and even 2012?
I'm certainly more than 2012. And I think it's similar, like the construction of the teams feels similar to me to 18 and 20, but the path feels a lot different. Like you mentioned that it's longer, but I don't feel like they're going to run into Trevor Lawrence or the collection of Devonta Smith, Mac Jones, Najee Harris, like out of the gate. Even beyond Indiana, Georgia, it's a weird Georgia team that lost its starting quarterback. Then it's Penn State in the semifinals. Like just think of like a like for like semifinal matchup. Trevor Lawrence in Clemson, Mac Jones in Alabama, or James Franklin in Penn State. Like one of those is not like the others. I mean, that's putting aside the 2012 Alabama team. So I just like the path is so much different. Not just in terms of the amount of wins Notre Dame need to get, but I just don't think there's like that final boss out of the gate that almost sort of takes your hope away before the kickoff. I just think there's a lot more hope and expectation around this team than 18 or certainly more than 20.
Yeah, and as you've sort of alluded to, there are certainly some parallels with this group and the other ones that we're talking about here. They got to this point by running the ball on offense and playing great defense, just like they did in 2020, 18, and 12. But what do you think are the biggest differences that separate this group from the rest of those teams? The quarterback play is different. I think Ian Book is kind of criminally underrated, so I wouldn't say that the quarterback play is better. The receiver play is similar. I think the offensive line is similar, but probably better on those other two teams. The construction of the defense is similar. I think the depth is a lot better now. We were talking before we hit record about the Clemson game, and Julian Love goes out, so you're down to your third corner. The entire defense collapses. Notre Dame is playing its fourth corner, like from the depth chart on opening night at Texas A&M, right? Like Leonard Moore was passing Jaden Mickey, but just like if you imagine him as your fourth corner, and the defense is still number one in the country in pass efficiency defense, I think, even after the USC game, to lose your two best pure pass rushers off the edge, play essentially the second half of the season without Howard Cross, that
that speaks to the depth being a lot better than where it was in 2020 or 2018.
The depth has certainly been tested this year with all the season-ending injuries that they've dealt with on defense, and even the ones on offense too, like losing Ashton Craig was a big loss, but Pat Coogan has stepped in. I think, to me, you already talked about the depth across the board. That's obviously been huge for this team, but I also think that this team, and specifically on offense, they're more athletic. Now, big reason why is the quarterback and the two running backs, not so much to do with the wide receivers. And then on defense, they're also extremely athletic and violent. Like when I was watching that SEC championship game between Georgia and Texas, usually in the past, I watched that thinking like, they're kind of playing at a different level than Notre Dame, but it doesn't really feel like that because Notre Dame actually has the athletes on the field now to compete with that. Do you feel like the gap in terms of athleticism and physicality has been diminished with this year's team and what they bring to the table?
I think defensively, yes. It's funny you mentioned like is this the same sport? Because I remember watching Alabama, Georgia from earlier in the year and thinking like different sport. You're seeing Ryan Williams make a pirouette, like kind of Jeremiah Love stuff, right? But I think defensively Notre Dame is right there. And it's funny you mentioned Jeremiah Love a little bit, like the hurdles, and you think back like, oh yeah, that was what Najee Harris did to Nick McLeod in the Rose Bowl in 2020. Like now Jeremiah Love does that to, one person every other week. So I think athletically, just in terms of like whether you want to use the term sudden or twitchy or bouncy or whatever, I think Notre Dame is built more like a speed team than certainly, the 2012 team was like, I don't want to say they were plotting on defense, but that was like a throwback 1984 Big Ten defense. That was just like very physical and big and strong all over the place. This team, I think, is sort of built for speed, but they're still violent. It's not like they're built for speed and their finesse. So that's, I think, an important distinction to draw.
Without a doubt. And I think when you look at the road ahead, unlike most years, it doesn't really feel like there's that one team who's head and shoulders above anybody else. So I know this is like a crazy thing to ask you, but do you believe that this is Notre Dame's best chance at making the national championship and potentially winning it since you started covering the team?
Yes. I think that when somebody asked me to sort of go through it, like if I put together a 12-team playoff bracket of just Notre Dame teams, I think I would have this team as the second best team in that group. Like I'm still sort of partial to the Brady Quinn junior year team at full strength. I think offensively they could score on anybody. But I mean, this team, the way it's put together, and it's like, it's a shame that we are not going to get to see Traore, Morrison, Botello, Craig out there to like make a run at full strength. Cause I do think this is their best chance in at least 20 years of going all the way. And I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to say that when Morrison and Traore went out, but I think they've really passed all tests with flying colors since.
I agree. After Morrison went down, I felt like it almost put a cap on what this team could accomplish this season. And I think it's partially because it happened right around that time of the Alabama and Georgia game. And you're watching those two high-flying offenses go at it. And you're thinking, like, how is Notre Dame going to be able to stop a team like this if they don't have Benjamin Morrison? And then credit to Leonard Moore, the way that he has stepped in. He has exceeded all of our expectations to the point now where you actually think he might be the better option at corner compared to Christian Gray, which would have been insane to say at the beginning of the year. But in terms of the path, I love it. It's not as easy as Penn State's, but the opportunity to play a team like Indiana and then potentially Georgia is way more exciting despite the challenges. And for those of you listening who are not chronically online, Pete nailed his prediction immediately after the conference championships. You predicted the first round matchup with Notre Dame and Indiana and even got the second round opponent and location right as well. So hats off to you for predicting what the committee would ultimately decide. But do you think they got it right? We'll put the flawed format aside for a second.
Yeah, I think that they got the best version of the format that they had to fill out. And really at the end, it's like, is it SMU or is it Alabama? I think that in the first half of the SMU Clemson game, I would have said it was Alabama. And by the end of that game, it was back to being SMU. So it's, when people say conference championships don't matter anymore, like I think SMU was out and then played their way back in with how that game finished. So I mean, I realize what happened to Florida State last year should have no bearing on what happens now, but I'm not sure how that couldn't from a human nature point of view. So I think, from the first round point of view, if I was Notre Dame, SMU would be a much tougher matchup than Indiana. I really like what SMU brings to the table, and I thought they were a deserving one of the last teams in.
We're going to be right back with Pete in a second to break down how Notre Dame stacks up against the Indiana Hoosiers and why he feels very confident about the Irish heading into this matchup. But first, I want to talk to you about Gametime. There really is nothing quite like the hype and atmosphere of being at a live sporting event. I can't tell you how excited I am to see what the crowd is going to be like when the Irish take on the Hoosiers in the first home playoff game ever. And Gametime has a great new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for all your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I recently used Gametime to go to a Lakers game and had a ton of fun, even though that Lakers team has been struggling mightily as of late. Plus, Gametime is the perfect place to buy tickets to a live event for your friends and family for that priceless gift during this holiday season. My favorite thing about the app, though, is you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and then you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Plus, the all-in pricing shows your total cost upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Game time. Let's dive into that matchup with Indiana. I know it's still a little bit early, but just from what you know about this team, where do you think they pose the biggest threat to Notre Dame?
I think that their run defense is legit, and it should be good enough that Notre Dame is going to feel like they're being forced to throw. And I'm interested to sort of see how Mike Denbrock and Riley Leonard, if they can be stubborn enough in a good way to keep running it. I don't like the idea of throwing the ball 35 times with Riley Leonard on Friday, December 20th at 8 p.m. I just don't think that's a winning formula when you got Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. So that's where I think Indiana can actually make some real problems for Notre Dame. They have a really good pass rush, and that's even better when it's 3rd and 8, when you've had a 2-yard run and an incomplete pass. So that's where I feel like Indiana could actually pose some issues for Notre Dame. On the other side of the ball, I just have a difficult time seeing Indiana looking a whole lot different than they did against Ohio State offensively. Maybe a little bit better, but Notre Dame is as complete, if not more complete, than Ohio State defensively, and Indiana could barely move the ball at all in that game. I think they're going to have a really tough time on December 20th.
Yeah, they could not move the ball at all against Ohio State. When I look at their run defense, I think that they are talented. They certainly have some good guys on that defense that are going to cause some problems for Notre Dame. But something to also take into account here, Indiana has pummeled pretty much every team they've played, and they've gotten out to a big early lead. Like, I don't think teams have even tried to run the ball on them because they have been down by so much early. Now, that's one way the stats might be a little bit misleading in a way, still saying that there is a good group over there and they're going to be able to cause some problems. And then when you think about the weather, like all these Notre Dame fans were disappointed. And even Marcus Freeman said he probably would have preferred a team from the South to have to come up to Notre Dame and play during that time of year. Indiana's offense is so based on efficiency, timing in the passing game. Like if it's really windy, it's really cold. If there's any type of precipitation, I think that could ultimately play a big factor in favor of Notre Dame. Do you think that's going to have an impact now that they're playing a team like Indiana?
I think the wind, yes. Cold, no. I mean, Indiana probably will have played in much colder games than what they're going to play in on December 20th. Like Thanksgiving weekend here, when they played Purdue, I'm assuming that game was in the 30s. I was fortunate enough to be in Los Angeles at that time, so can't speak for certain. But if there's wind, yes. Precipitation, yes. Cold weather, probably not. In a way that I would have loved to have seen Miami come up here in December 20th. Yeah. I think the temperatures probably don't mean a whole lot for Indiana.
I get that. Outside of just Notre Dame's defense as a whole, where do you think the Irish have the biggest advantage going up against Indiana?
Well, I mean, they're better at every position. And that's, short of defensive end, maybe. So I think that Notre Dame top to bottom, they've been pushed a little bit, maybe more than Indiana has. I think that's a benefit. The way the USC game went, I think is a benefit for Notre Dame, where they sort of tasted their own blood, so to speak, in the fourth quarter. So I just think that Notre Dame has sort of had the complete arc of a season where they've sort of been there and done that, in a way that like Indiana's season is much more the unexpected success, kind of riding the wave a little bit. So I think, from a matchup point of view, Notre Dame they should have matchups to their advantage all over the field. If they can establish some semblance of a run game, I think that they will be fine on December 20th. But like we're talking about Notre Dame's defense against Indiana's offense, I think Curtis Rourke is probably going to be in for a pretty rough night.
To me, the thing that gives me confidence that this Notre Dame team can go far is number 4, Jeremiah Love. He's been playing at such a high level. I honestly think he's going to be the best player on the field, no matter who Notre Dame is playing the rest of the way. Even Georgia, who has a ton of dudes on that defense. You have been covering this team for a long time. Where does Love rank among the most exciting players that you've watched in the blue and gold?
Man, like running backs, number 1. Like that's at this point, I don't even think it's like that much of a debate. Players, I would still probably give the edge to Golden Tate, but I might be trying to avoid recency bias at that point. Because Golden Tate those were 2 spectacular years. Will Fuller's junior and sophomore year were amazing, but I just haven't seen like a running back do this. So there's more a high volume or a high frequency of like wow plays. So, I mean, Fuller, Tate, Love. I'm probably forgetting somebody else. I mean, Michael Floyd was incredible, but I'm not sure he was like a wow athlete per se. So like those 3, like he's in the group with those 3. And before the season started, like I thought he was going to be very, very good this year. But he's gone way beyond that with some of the spectacular plays that he's made.
It's unbelievable. The stuff that he does, the hurdle against Army is almost forgotten now because of what he did against USC. And even that was an incredible play just because he makes it look so effortless. I loved Kyron Williams. I loved Audric Esme. I think what Jeremiah Love brings to the table is very different than any other Notre Dame running back I have seen in my lifetime. But as for the quarterback, Riley Leonard's performance has dominated the conversation amongst the fan base throughout the season. I would say his progress hasn't been linear, but I do think he's been playing really good football, especially as of late, and I trust that he can elevate this offense in the playoffs. So how much faith do you have in him to lead this team and this offense going into the CFP?
If he has to be throw first, I'm still concerned about that. And that's like accounting for the fact, like over the last 10 games, if you just took his pass efficiency rating, I think he's like right at 20th. If that was a season long rating. So yeah, he's played a lot better. The combination of Riley Leonard and Notre Dame's wide receivers, if they have to throw the ball in the fourth quarter and they're down double digits, still pretty concerned about that. But as a runner, I think he's been outstanding.
Yeah, how do you think Notre Dame is going to adjust their offensive game plan and philosophy now that they're heading into the playoff? Because like the beginning of the season, especially that Texas A&M game, Notre Dame ran Riley Leonard a lot. They ran him early. They ran him often. Even in that first drive against Northern Illinois, he carried the ball a lot. Then we didn't really see a whole lot of that throughout much of the second half of the season. But I get the feeling that going into this playoff that they're not going to hold anything back, and we might see more Riley Leonard as a runner than we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I think so. And like against Indiana, maybe you try to balance it out a little bit more. But I think once you get into like the Georgia Penn State type games, then you're it's like 10, 11, 12 carries. You're not thinking twice about that. I think part of the season, like keeping the carries down, was to develop him as a passer, sort of forcing the growth. Once you get into the playoffs, it's just whatever gets you to the next game. You're not worried about like a long-term growth curve there. So I would agree with you. Probably see a lot more Leonard runs in the postseason.
For Notre Dame, injuries have obviously been a huge story of this season. Mitchell Evans and his recovery hasn't really gone quite to plan. Howard Cross missed the last few games of the regular season. Jeremiah Love left the USC game. I know that Marcus Freeman said that he expects Howard Cross to play and he expects Jeremiah Love to play. Unfortunately, the freshman linebacker Kingston Viliamu-Asa is going to be out. But on the injury front, how healthy do you think Notre Dame will be going into this game compared to how they've been, during that last little stretch there in the season?
Well, I think, having Cross back will be, huge. So that's a significant one. Beyond that, is Charles Jagasa going to give you something in practice? Probably. Is that going to make a difference in a game? Maybe not. But beyond that, I think that the injuries, like you have a shoulder or an ankle, like Jordan Faison, I don't know if he ever really was right all year after spraining his ankle, I think against A&M and then re-spraining it against Louisville. So for somebody like that, I think that could be really significant. But Cross is the big one. They expect him fully to be back, and that makes a big difference up front.
Pete and I still have more to get to, including why we both believe the atmosphere inside Notre Dame Stadium will be unlike anything we have seen in a long time. But first, a word from our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You've heard me say it all week, folks. I'm on the Rams +2.5 against the 49ers tonight on Thursday Night Football. I loved what I saw from the Rams on Sunday against the Bills, and I think they keep it going against a 49ers team that has just had everything go wrong for them this season. And for more, just visit FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Last season, I was at that Ohio State game, and I think that is the most electric atmosphere I've ever experienced in that stadium. It lived up to the hype and then some, and I have a feeling that this game against Indiana is going to top it. I've seen the ticket prices on the secondary market, but I also know there's a ton of IU fans who are going to try and get in there too, because this feels like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them. So what steps has the university taken to ensure that they have the best home field advantage possible for this game?
Well, the tickets never went to market. They were sold out immediately before there was ever a sale. So that was similar to Ohio State. Those tickets never went to market either. So that's a good first step. I think it's not that it's a first or once in a lifetime opportunity for Notre Dame football fans, but it is a first in a lifetime opportunity. Like, I think we sort of forget in a place like Notre Dame, there's not a lot of firsts anymore. So when one comes along, you want to be there to see it. So I expect that there will be some red in the stadium. They only got 3,500 tickets. There'll probably be more than that in there. But I expect it to be a heavy, heavy Notre Dame crowd. A lot less red than there was here for Ohio State last year. And I thought Notre Dame did a good job with that. But I think this crowd will be even more partial to the home team than that team was.
Has Notre Dame done anything beyond just looking at the tickets? Because like you said, this has been something that they've been planning for a really long time. I remember seeing some people get upset about the fact that Notre Dame shouldn't be doing that. They're, putting the cart in front of the horse. It's like, well, if they don't do it, then they get to the playoff and they have nothing planned. So it seems like the university has been preparing for this for a really long time. What are some other ways that you've seen that sort of manifest itself as they prepare for this weekend?
Well, they've talked about, okay, what happens if you have a Buffalo Bills weather event? Like, does every ticket just go to general admission all of a sudden because you can't clear out the stadium? That's something that they've considered. How else do you work? I think the ticketing aspect is complicated because the CFP sort of controls ticketing and the price points of those. So they had maybe less control about the cost, but they've sort of managed the distribution, I think, pretty smartly, where it's not just sort of the first tier donors that have had the best access to the tickets. It's like a tier up. So unless you're donating $1,500 to the university, your lottery results probably were not that good this week, or you're a season ticket holder, which again is something Notre Dame wants to draw out and increase over time. So overall, it's like they've been thinking about this for a very, very long time, from a ticketing, from a promotion standpoint. They've also been very coy about talking about it. I've sort of been asking to do interviews on that for about 9 months and been rebuffed multiple times. Hopefully that will change in the coming days and weeks, but it's definitely something that they started planning for last spring. It's not, and I think that to Notre Dame's credit, if you talk to people on campus, whether they're in the athletic department or just the administration, it wasn't just making the playoff; it was hosting a playoff game, like moving finals around, keeping the dorms open later. There was a lot of accommodations in this where Notre Dame was all in on hosting a game, not just making the postseason.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of IU fans in my life, and they've been saying that IU is going to take over because they've got plenty of rich alums. It's not really that far for them to travel if they're in-state or if they live in Chicago, which I know a lot of IU alums do. And it's like, that's great. They can have a strong desire to go to the game. They can have a willingness to pay a fortune because that might be what it costs to go to the game. But in order for them to get access to tickets, some diehard Notre Dame fans and season ticket holders are going to have to be willing to sell them because otherwise, I don't really think they have that many options to buy them. So I'm with you. I think it's going to be a big Notre Dame crowd, and it's going to be a home atmosphere unlike anything we've seen in a long time. But as we look back on how they got to this point, my dumbass declared the season over after the loss to Northern Illinois. I was sure that they would stumble again after that game. But to their credit, they didn't do that, and they dominated pretty much everyone in their path on the way to an 11-1 finish. I remember listening to you and Matt Fortuna around that time, and it felt like you guys felt the same way I did. So at what point in the season did you buy back into this team and what they could accomplish?
Probably Louisville. I think when they got to the other side of that one, you're like, okay, now, not that like, hey, the path is cleared again, because that's exactly what we thought after A&M.
Yeah.
But they had sort of been pushed to the limit and come out the other side. They won a game on offense. They still shot themselves in the foot multiple times in that game and came out the other side. So that was probably when I was like, all right, they're at least getting to USC undefeated. Like, I always felt like USC was more of a toss-up than people wanted to admit, just because weird stuff happens out there.
Yeah, I
remember 2012. I remember 2018. Like, those were great Notre Dame teams. Those were bad USC teams, and those were one-score games. So it wasn't surprising to me that it was tight. But I do think once they got past Louisville and then they quickly just started murdering people, that there was a maturity to this team and like a ruthlessness to this team that I don't think I accounted for in August. Like, it was almost like a vindictiveness where there was one point in the year where I was like, God, we're still talking about Northern Illinois. And then I realized, like, they actually want us to still talk about Northern Illinois, because like they're still talking about Northern Illinois, because it's like they like it. It was kind of like sadomasochistic. It was like this, but they just got juice off of it. And it wasn't because like they were ticked off about being reminded about it. They were ticked off that it happened at all, and they were going to take it out on everybody. It was like the Drew Tranquil post Georgia speech, if you remember that from 2017.
Yeah, that actually came to fruition.
Yeah, but then they just lived it every week the rest of the year, and they made other teams feel as bad as they felt after that game. And that was, I'll be honest, like, I didn't think Notre Dame had that in them. So that was really impressive.
I didn't think they had it in them either. That's why I said, well, the season is over after that loss to Northern Illinois. But you seem to have jumped back on the bandwagon a little bit earlier than I did, because for me, it was the Navy game. Because like, while it was good that they got through Louisville, it's a ranked opponent, revenge for the season before. Like, that game was so frustrating still in so many ways, the fumble to start the game. So it took me a little bit, but then after the Navy game, it's like, okay, these guys are for real. And a big reason why is Marcus Freeman and his leadership. You mentioned the Northern Illinois part. He was talking about it at halftime of the USC game in that video that Notre Dame's social media team put out there. And we already knew that this was going to be a huge year for him, year 3 at Notre Dame. But how has your perception of him changed as he's navigated this team through some rough waters?
I think he's a lot more sure of himself. And I talked to Aaron Taylor about this for just sort of like a big picture story that I have to write for The Athletic. And Aaron came out to Notre Dame before USC week because it was a CBS game. And I asked him, like, did Marcus seem different to you than year 1, year 2? And he's like, year 1, year 2, it sounded like he was saying what he thought a head coach was supposed to say. in year 3, he actually believed the words coming out of his mouth. You remember like the Army game when he talked about violence in pregame, like he wouldn't have said that in year 1 or year 2. But he absolutely would and believed it in year 3. And I think that sort of what I've found out about Marcus sort of reporting on him this year, talking to some, former coaches that have worked with him, is like, he's got a real like fight or flight mentality. And once he gets in that mode, like that's where he lives. Like he loves to be in fight or flight. And Northern Illinois sort of put him in that mode faster than he wanted to be put in it. But once he was there, he sort of loved being there, and was able to sort of drag the rest of the team along with him. So I think that part is impressive to me, that he was able to sort of drag the team along and sort of get in the same headspace that he got into after the NIU game.
And throughout the offseason, we talked about how it was playoff or bust for this team. Now that they have made the playoff and we know the path ahead of them, I think I've had to reset my own expectations. Indiana is going to present a difficult challenge, but Notre Dame should win that game. And this might be their best chance at beating Georgia since 2017, especially if Carson Beck is unavailable. So how have you recalibrated your expectations for this team, and what do you think would be considered a successful season now that they've reached this point?
Well, I mean, you definitely have to beat Indiana at home. And then Georgia is like, that's a toss-up game. Like I think I could see myself writing, hey, Notre Dame had a successful season if they lost to Georgia. I could see myself writing this season is a one of unfulfilled expectations if they lost. If they win, obviously done, money in the bank. But I do think it's kind of one of those toss-up games. I haven't seen Notre Dame win a game like that ever. It's like that's a major bowl game. I've never seen Notre Dame win one. So if they did that, that would be new territory for Notre Dame, at least in my time on the beat. And at that point, there's no doubt it is a successful season, regardless of what happened after that. But you're right. I think part of the, man, you really want to see them make a run if you're a Notre Dame fan, is like not every team is built like this team. Like Notre Dame isn't built to sort of do the Ohio State thing every year, where it's just like, if you don't go 14-0, it's a disappointment. Like Notre Dame sort of builds in cycles. Like this is the top of a cycle. Like they have to make a run this year, because this is a team that's built to win it all or get to the end of the line. So, I don't know. That's a rambling way to say, like, I don't know what success will look like. I know they have to beat Indiana. And then, man, it's like Georgia, you're just not going to get a better chance to get Georgia than you are right now.
That's kind of how I feel too, because if they lose to Indiana, the season is still going to feel like a disappointment. But then every game after that, it kind of sets up where it's like, okay, if you beat Indiana, but you lose a tight one to Georgia, it's like, man, when are they ever going to beat Georgia? This was a great chance. And then if they beat Georgia, then you've got Penn State in the semifinals potentially. And then it's like, when are you going to get a team like Penn State in the semifinals? And if you win that game, you're in the championship. It's like, when are you going to get back to the championship? So it feels insane to say this is championship or bust, but the way that everything sort of sets up, it almost feels that way. But again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Notre Dame has to take care of business against Indiana. But as you take in the season as a whole and the success that they have had this year, when you start to look ahead to things like recruiting, the portal, the buy-in from donors and administration, how important do you think the success of this season will have on the future of the program?
Oh, I think it's huge, because I remember talking to donors after Northern Illinois, and the sense was like, what?
We paid for that?
What? Like, this is what we're getting for NIL here? So yeah, it's a proof of concept issue. And Notre Dame's done a great job, I think, being aggressive in the portal. But you had to keep backing it up with wins. You had to keep making progress. They've done that. From a recruiting point of view, it's almost like harder to get a read on recruiting than it is on the portal, which is weird to say around Notre Dame. But what high school kids want and what college athletes want, I think are different. They both want to get paid, but one of them is going to produce, and the other one you're hoping you can develop over 3 or 4 years. So I think Notre Dame's done a good job for that. I think they can continue to be aggressive in the portal and should be. I think, recruiting, it was a good class, maybe not a great class this year. Is there more upward mobility there? But what college football is today versus just when Marcus Freeman took the job. It's unrecognizable. So you kind of have to adapt or die. I think Notre Dame's done a pretty good job of adapting so far, but they're going to have to keep doing that moving forward.
All right, last question on the way out. I know it's still early, so I'm not going to ask for a score prediction or anything like that. But as we sit here just a little bit more than a week away from that first round matchup, how do you think Notre Dame will play against Indiana?
I think they'll play really well. I think Marcus Freeman, he's grown as a head coach a lot. But one thing he was good at the beginning was getting a team up for a big game. They're all big games from here. So my confidence in Marcus Freeman, the head coach at this point, pretty high, because I think that from here on out, we're playing to his strengths as a head coach. And I mean, even think about, you go back to 2012, it was like Nick Saban had done that thing, the long layoff, the prep. Brian Kelly's like, okay, we'll figure this out as we go. No one's done this version of the playoff before. Nobody. So I think that even levels the decks a little bit for Marcus Freeman, but he knows how to win a big game. He knows how to get the team up for a big game. They're all big games from here. So my level of confidence for Indiana is actually really high. I'm not saying they're going to win 45-10, but I think that they will play well and they will win on December 20th. And then we can talk about Georgia and going to the Sugar Bowl and what that opportunity looks like.
Yeah, and our New Year's Eve plans on Bourbon Street.
Oh, my goodness.
Let's hope we get to plan that one day, but that's all I have for you today. You can read all of Pete's work on The Athletic. Plus, you can listen to his podcast, The Independent, with another great friend of the program, Matt Fortuna. We wish him well as he deals with some health issues. But, Pete, I always appreciate the time. Stay warm this time of year, and hopefully I see you in a couple weeks. Take care, man.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tyler.
That is going to do it for today's episode. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with another mailbag. So remember, submit your questions in the YouTube comments, or you can send them to me on social media. Also, quick reminder, before you head out, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you enjoyed the show today, please give this video a like if you're watching along on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review on your preferred platform, because I promise you it goes a long way in helping out this show. And I appreciate all of your support, and I hope to see you tomorrow morning.